Hey everyone, my name is Lori Peak and I'm a professor of sociology and director of the Natural Hazard Center here at the University of Colorado Boulder. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the monthly Making Mitigation Work webinar series, which is hosted by the Natural Hazard Center and made possible with the support of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the National Science Foundation. This webinar series highlights recent progress in mitigation policy, practice, and research. We are so grateful that you have joined us today, and we want to begin by acknowledging how much has happened in our world since our last webinar in March. The COVID-19 pandemic has swept across the globe and the United States. Now, for the first time in our national history, all 50 states are under a major disaster declaration. There is no life that has gone untouched by this pandemic, and we want to recognize and thank those who are on the front lines of this catastrophe, from the healthcare workers to the emergency managers to the federal, state, and local officials to the researchers and many others who are seeking to understand and slow the spread. Our last webinar, which was held on March 8th, focused on earthquake mitigation activities along the Wasatch Fault in Utah and featured Sean McGowan from FEMA Region 8 and Brad Bartholomew from the Utah Division of Emergency Management. Only 10 days after they delivered their presentation, Utah was rocked by a magnitude 5.7 earthquake. It was not the big one that they have been planning for, but it was a reminder that natural hazards will not stand down in the face of this pandemic. Thank you to all of you for the work that you are doing to reduce the risks that a growing number of people face in this nation and around the world. Today, we will hear from two of the leading experts on wildfire mitigation. A few announcements before we begin with the formal webinar presentation. Please note that this forum is being recorded. The captioned webinar video and the presentation slides will be posted online at the Natural Hazard Center website, which is hazards.colorado.edu. This is also where you can find the recordings and supplemental materials from the prior Making Mitigation Work webinars, as well as access to many other free resources. We also wanted to notify all participants that thanks to a partnership with the International Association of Emergency Managers, we are now offering 1 contact hour of emergency management training through the IAEM certification program. To receive the credit, you are required to attend for the entire webinar session. Please visit the Making Mitigation Work webpage under the Trainings tab at hazards.colorado.edu for more information. You can contact Katie Murphy, whose email address is on the website, for more information on receiving your certificate for attending this webinar today. If at any point during the presentation you have questions or comments, you can offer those either via the chat function or the Q&A box on Zoom. Our speakers will respond to questions as time permits during the webinar. For those questions we are unable to get to, we will share written responses via the Making Mitigation Work webinar page. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers for today's webinar. Please note that their full and impressive bios are posted on the Making Mitigation Work website. For now, I am so pleased to welcome Chris Barth and Hannah Brenkert-Smith. Chris is a fire mitigation specialist with the Bureau of Land Management. He has a master's degree in environmental education and has received several national awards for his work to communicate about and reduce wildfire risk. Hannah Brenkert-Smith is an assistant research professor here in the Institute of Behavioral Science at the University of Colorado Boulder. Hannah is an acclaimed environmental sociologist who has dedicated her career to understanding household and community response to wildfire risk. Hannah and Chris are both among the visionary founding members of the Wildfire Research, or WIRE, team that you are going to hear more about today, and that is helping to spur evidence-informed wildfire mitigation activities in the Mountain West and beyond. Hannah and Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to go ahead and turn the slide presentation capabilities over to you now. As we do that, I hope our webinar participants will join in offering a warm virtual welcome. Chris, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Laura. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. So again, thank you. I wanted to thank Lori for that very kind introduction, and thank you to everybody who's joining us. Today, we'd like to share with you a long-running practitioner-researcher collaboration that increases the relevance and efficacy of wildfire mitigation programs. The Wildfire Research, or WIRE team, understands that a one-size-fits-all solution to reducing wildfire risk is not realistic. Our unique approach unites research and practice, collecting and using community-specific data to tailor programs that support local solutions and allow communities to get ahead of the wildfire issues. We plan to demonstrate today how pairing wildfire risk and assessments, along with household surveys, pairing wildfire risk assessments and household surveys have led to an increased engagement and an increase in wildfire risk mitigation. Our conversation today will introduce you to the WIRE team and the WIRE Center, provide context of the wildfire problem in the U.S., describe paired parcel level data collection effort that sets the WIRE approach apart from other efforts, and share some of the research and practitioner outcomes as a result of our work with partners. For more than a decade, the WIRE team has collaborated to better understand and further wildfire risk mitigation efforts. Our work crosses conventional boundaries between practice and research, and our members come from multiple federal agencies, universities, and the nonprofit wildfire mitigation community. We practice true co-production of applied research, working closely through all stages of the research process and generating products that speak to both research and practice communities. The WIRE Center provides the avenue through which communities can access the expertise of the WIRE team and implement the WIRE team's approach. To help frame the wildfire issue and provide context, I just wanted to give us all the same common operating picture. The challenges associated with wildfire are increasing in both complexity and extent. Fire seasons are longer and more destructive. In fact, most wildfire professionals now talk about fire year rather than fire season. We spend nearly $30 billion in suppression annually, we spend nearly $3 billion in suppression annually, and the true cost of wildfire is estimated to be about 30 times the cost of suppression. Our fire management efforts tend to focus on suppression and acres treated, and the number of homes at risk is expected to double in the next 10 years. And many wildfire risk mitigation programs are responsive rather than proactive, without previous planning and general in nature. In other words, they're not strategic or community specific. However, the pursuit of fire adapted communities, one of the tenets of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all strategy to reducing risk. Solutions must be tailored to the local community. WIRE tends to the quiet majority, or the whole community, rather than the vocal minority. And I just wanted to share a little anecdote. In January and February this year, I was in Australia with my incident management team, helping to manage about 1.2 million acres of fire in the state of Victoria. I'm sure everyone in the webinar heard about how devastating the Australia wildfires were this year. However, I had the chance to visit with one of the local residents while I was there. She shared with me that her family has grown up with fire. It was part of their life. They had a plan. For them, it was not a disrupting force as it was portrayed globally. WIRI has been exploring these issues for about 15 years. We began our work along the Front Range of Colorado. Over time, our work expanded to Southwest Colorado and is now being implemented in several states, with more on the horizon. We're currently planning our work into 2021. So there's a naive model of behavior change that assumes that if you give people information, the end state or the end goal of more mitigation is going to happen. However, as I mentioned previously, many programs use generic information that assume that information about wildfire risk is lacking. They prioritize wildfire risk over the social processes that motivate individuals to act. The WIRI model of behavior change acknowledges that increased mitigation requires interaction between wildfire practitioners and parcel-specific information about the social and biophysical conditions. The foundation of the WIRI approach is this paired parcel-specific information in the form of a rapid wildfire risk assessment and a household survey of all properties in a given community. The rapid wildfire risk assessment is based on observed conditions of the property. It has looks at the attributes related to building materials, vegetation near the home, background fuels and topography, as well as access to the parcel. The rapid assessment serves as an indicator of relative risk of parcels within the community rather than an absolute measure of risk. The risk assessments are conducted by local practitioners. The household surveys are completed by residents of the assessed parcels to investigate their perceptions of wildfire risk. The survey includes about 120 questions and asks residents about the same attributes from the risk assessment, as well as their views about wildfire mitigation behaviors, among other things. The household survey is administered by local practitioner organizations. And now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah to share how understanding communities and the residents within them informs our research and assists our partners in making mitigation work.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right. So when the researchers of the WIRI team started working on the wildfire domain, most of our work was relatively wide-ranging and exploratory. And my forward button isn't, oh, there we are, thank you. And exploratory. As of the early 2000s, there hadn't been all that much social science in the wildfire domain. And in fact, I recall feeling a little bit embarrassed that I was working on a hazard that had low relative losses compared to natural hazards and disasters that had garnered more attention, like hurricanes and floods. Of course, the upward trends we are seeing in wildfire-related losses unfold now are consistent with the predictions of that time. But we were curious, and we felt like there were many potential avenues for interesting research. We didn't know at the time that we were collecting the building blocks to develop our co-productive model of research. We were working with a rather big picture agenda. We were meeting wildfire practitioners along the way, and we were starting to gain insight into the very real dilemmas that practitioners were facing in making mitigation work on the ground. And indeed, our very notion of who we were was evolving as practitioners like Chris were becoming an integral part of the formation of our team. At that time, our research was exploratory and scoping. We were interested in social processes and relationships. We were interested in policy and institutional arrangements. The researchers came with different academic lenses and different theoretical assumptions. We were working in varied contexts, and we were lucky enough to have frequent engagement with practitioners. Key insights about risk reduction actions that were emerging in those early years of our work were that residents were taking their own parcel's conditions and the context of the broader biophysical and social landscape into consideration when they were making decisions. We were seeing that in-person engagement with local experts was associated with more mitigation action. Those interactions were serving as touchstone experiences in which generic mitigation recommendations were being translated into actionable steps for individuals to take on their own parcels. And we were seeing that incentives, access to local programs, and specific pathways that support risk reduction were helping to increase mitigation activities. And so we started building out what we now call the WIRI approach, which at its core seeks to understand the unique characteristics of an entire community. We use social science to characterize communities and social processes. The social and biophysical data are collected systematically. We learn as we go. We maintain a curiosity state of mind, and we've been adapting to the changing policy, funding, and conceptual landscapes. And we've been leveraging what we learn. The founding members of our team who've been working together for over 15 years, we continue to learn from each other and build understandings of each other's perspectives. And we focus on insights to support the development of effective wildfire education and mitigation programs, to infuse research results into programs. And we can see that this process can change conversations. So we have all these great data. And those data provide the foundation for our insights. And you can review all our peer-reviewed publications on our website that I'll share later. But since the core tenet of our collaboration is that our results are meaningful and useful on the ground, what I'm going to focus on today is some of our practitioner outcomes that sit on the foundation of the research. So the practitioner organization that the WIRI team has been working with the longest is the West Region Wildfire Council. And so today I'm going to focus on talking about results from their area and their program. West Region Wildfire Council serves 6 Southwest Colorado counties. And West Region had been working with the town of Mountain Village in San Miguel County, Colorado, trying to move that community toward increasing their wildfire mitigation practices. And they found that the dominant narrative of the town council was that people were simply unwilling to cut trees for wildfire. It was considered a non-starter and not worth the potential conflict to try to move a wildfire risk reduction agenda forward. The executive director of West Region Wildfire Council at the time, Lilia Falk, attended a town meeting to present data from the household survey that was conducted. Those data showed that of the respondents to the survey, 77% were willing to remove trees to reduce wildfire risk. This one data point alone wedged the door open to having discussions about wildfire risk mitigation activities in the community. Lilia then shared a second data point, that 46%, nearly half of the survey respondents, had reported that they faced restrictions on cutting trees for wildfire risk reduction from their own homeowners associations. And of course, such restrictions are quite common across the American West. Mandates to maintain shake shingle roofs, which are extremely flammable, and limits on tree removal have historically been foundational tenets in such communities. And to make changes to a community's covenants, organizational processes are required, and that's exactly what a town council can help facilitate. And so with these 2 data points, the town of Mountain Village had a new narrative about the residents. They were moving from anecdote to evidence, and they had a specific pathway to move forward. And this is the direct benefit we're seeing from local data. As Chris explained, the cornerstone of the WIRI approach is the pairing of parcel level rapid risk assessment data with household survey data conducted as a census of a community. So why do we use both a professional risk assessment of the parcel and also ask survey respondents to self-assess their own properties? Here you see the overall risk rating for households studied in Southwest Colorado. The orange bars are the results of the practitioner's assessment of each parcels. And the red bars are the self-reported assessments. Pairing our professional assessment data with the survey data allows for a range of analyses that can serve our practitioner partners. For example, we can examine how people rate their own properties relative to how the local practitioners would rate them. And generally, we see that people underestimate their risk compared to the local practitioner. And we see this pattern consistently across our study areas. There is, however, some variation to this pattern, and we can tease that variation out. Since the risk assessment is comprised of the components that Chris described earlier, we can diagnose the components that contribute to the overall differences we see between the self-assessment and the practitioner assessment. For example, we can see how residents self-assess defensible space, which is essentially the distance from the home to flammable vegetation. And we can see that these respondents here consistently think that they have more defensible space than the professional sees. So the paired assessment and survey approach allows these analyses that can serve practitioner partners. A central goal of this comparison is to get the residents and the local mitigation practitioners on the same page. These assessments are quick, they're from the road. And so the mitigation specialist isn't always right. So the collection and the subsequent provision of these data, or this information, can actually serve as an opportunity to have a dialogue about the property and why the specific conditions on any particular property matters. And since we also have household survey data on attitudes and beliefs, we can probe further. One finding from Delta County, Colorado is that underestimating parcel risk conditions correlates with believing that there's a higher likelihood that the local fire department would save one's home during a wildfire event. In other words, those who underestimate the risk may be overly optimistic about the capacity of the local fire department to save their home. And that's a pretty important conversation to have. Of course, communities are made up of individuals who may have a wide array of perspectives related to wildfire and wildfire risk mitigation. Collectively, however, they can tell us something about their community. And as our work has progressed, we've been building a master data set to allow comparisons across communities. For example, here we see a range of reporting on expectations that the local fire department would save the respondent's home in a wildfire event. And this is by community. So each line here is one of 68 communities. Naturally, variations in expectations of whether a fire department could save one's home in the event of a wildfire could be based on personal perceptions, but it also likely reflects a collective understanding of local responders' capacity. And if the vast majority of your community feels it's likely that the fire department will save their home, then there may be a messaging program you'd like to undertake to make sure that they understand local constraints of actually parking a fire truck in front of each structure during a major wildfire event. If we were to simply rely on the mean across these communities, we'd lose sight of this wide variation, and we'd lose sight of the possible pathways for our practitioner partners to craft programs and messages that attend to local understandings. Other examples where we see broad variation across communities include expectations of what would happen during a wildfire, what sources of wildfire information residents rely on, the extent to which residents face informational barriers to risk reduction, and these all point to the critical role the local context plays in how programs might craft their efforts to support risk reduction activities. And overall, we believe that this type of information helps tailor approaches for different communities and contexts. Now, in contrast, there are some variables that remain relatively consistent across communities, especially general attitudes related to wildfire management priorities. For example, despite anecdotes that residents in fire-prone communities are unwilling to cut trees, the vast majority of our study areas, the vast majority of respondents indicate that they're willing to cut trees to reduce risk of wildfire, just like we saw in Town of Mountain Village. We see that respondents report that aesthetics are not a major barrier to mitigation activities, and we see that talking with neighbors is consistently associated with taking more action to reduce risk. Since we're working with practitioner organizations who run programs, we're interested in collecting data that can help them evaluate how effective their existing programs are. In the wildfire context, it's common for such organizations to run cost share programs to help subsidize the removal of vegetation around homes in the communities they serve. So we have asked willingness to pay questions. In this example, our partners at West Region Wildfire Council had been running a cost share program, and they wanted to know if they had the right ratio of the amount they contributed to the overall costs to the homeowner. At that time, West Region Wildfire Council covered 90% of the costs of mitigation on an acre. So we asked in our survey, if it costs approximately $1,000 to reduce vegetation on the acre surrounding your home, and there's a grant opportunity to share those costs, would you participate? In this community, we saw that 82% indicated that yes, they would be willing to, or they would be interested in participating. We then asked, what's the highest amount you'd be willing to pay for work for a contractor on the acre surrounding your home? Most reported that they were willing to pay about $400 or less, but many were willing to pay more. So what does that tell a small cash-strapped wildfire outreach nonprofit? Well, it tells them that they might be able to use a sliding scale for these cost share agreements. The money saved could shift toward expanding their program and offering cost shared opportunities to more residents. And if we look at the far right bars on the histogram, it also appears that some people may be interested in participating in the program for non-monetary reasons. When these cost share grants are administered, a wildfire practitioner goes to the owner's parcel and gives one-on-one personalized prescriptions for risk reduction work. In these interactions, the local practitioner translates the generic mitigation recommendations into specific tailored steps for that parcel, for that owner. And we speculate that some interest in the program comes simply from the interest for this opportunity for one-on-one engagement with local experts. One of the great benefits of a long-running relationship between researchers and practitioners is the opportunity to understand change over time, to enable monitoring of the social and biophysical conditions. So in 2012, we surveyed residents in one community in the West Region Wildfire Council area and learned that 35% of the respondents were struggling to deal with the slash. This is the limbs or brush or vegetation that's generated when mitigating wildfire risk. Often residents simply didn't have a way of disposing of it. One common way to dispose of slash is through a chipping program. So a chipper, one of those big machines you'd see a tree trimmer use, might be hauled out for use at a community site. The chipped slash can then be used to distribute for landscaping or hauled away. In that year, in 2012, West Region Wildfire Council had supported 51 households in this one community through their chipping program, and they had chipped 76 piles of slash. When West Region learned that over a third of the residents in this community were struggling with slash disposal, they expanded their chipping program. In 2017, we had the opportunity to resurvey this community. At that time, West Region had 118 participants and chipped 399 piles of slash in the same community. And the household survey indicated that only 13% of the respondents still were struggling with slash disposal. So not only was West Region able to respond to a local need because of the data they had in hand, but West Region was able to track this accomplishment. And they reported it back to their board and their funders that they had made some significant and measurable change on the ground. And so the last piece I'm going to talk about is a research endeavor that emerged also because of the long-standing relationships between researchers and practitioners that form the cornerstone of our team. And this is our nudge work. So we're currently running a research endeavor that's funded by the National Science Foundation's Decision and Risk Management Sciences Program and the U.S. Forest Service Human Dimensions Program. Our project began as a practitioner dilemma posed by the West Region Wildfire Council. They had 6,000 rapid risk assessments or rapid risk assessment data for 6,000 parcels. And they posed the question, how do we share this information with our residents? As part of their programs, West Region Wildfire Council, like many wildfire programs, have regular community meetings. And those are typically advertised in some kind of mailer. This was a postcard. And this time, when they mailed their postcard, in addition to sharing information about the meeting, each household received a tailored postcard that included their rapid risk assessment score that was binned from low, moderate, high, very high, or extreme. And after sending that postcard, they had something like 70 residents show up. Now, if you run community meetings in small communities, you know that that is a good outcome for a meeting. And so opportunities emerge when researchers work closely with practitioners. We have two perspectives, but we can develop shared goals. From the practitioner perspective, there was this question of how do we share the information? And a further question, since programs such as theirs are generally opt-in for residents, they wanted to know how can we engage residents where we have little working experience or we lack some avenues for entree, like a HOA, a homeowners association, where it might be a little easier to gain access to the community. From the research perspective, we had lots of questions, but we tried to focus. We know that behavioral biases can influence mitigation decisions, so we wondered, can we investigate this systematically? We know that specificity of risk information has been associated with risk mitigation actions, and so we wondered, does providing personalized risk assessment data lead to different behavioral outcomes compared to when providing just community level risk data? And through our work, we found that social processes such as social interactions are important in the wild and urban interface. And so we wondered, could social comparisons be leveraged to increase wildfire related behaviors? And so what West Region Wildfire Council had done with their initial postcard mailing effectively was they had implemented a nudge. Nudges entail the provision of low-cost bits of information. They're designed to change behavior. They come from the field of behavioral economics, and they've proven useful in supporting behavioral change that benefits health and the environment. In recent years, utility providers have nudged the community. They show us perhaps how much our water use has changed over time, how it compares to our neighbors, and all those bits of information were designed to help us reduce water use. And so we worked with West Region Wildfire Council to transform their postcard into a letter and to set up an experimental design to run a pilot project. In our experiment, we divided the recipients into 3 groups that received different treatments so that we can measure whether different kinds of information might lead to different behavioral outcomes. One group was told about their overall community level risk. Another group was told about their overall community level risk and their specific parcel risk. And a third group was told about the overall community risk, their specific parcel risk, and the average risk rating of their 10 closest neighbors. And in that letter, the recipients were instructed to visit a website and were given a personalized code so that they could see their wildfire risk assessment. In other words, the behavioral response initially in this experiment is for residents to go to a personalized website. Once the recipients were in the website, there were options for additional actions, like scheduling a local wildfire professional to visit their property to conduct an insight assessment and to talk through those conditions that are contributing to wildfire risk. Of course, mitigating a parcel for wildfire risk is much more complex than turning off the tap while you brush your teeth to reduce wildfire risk. But with the website, we are able to track whether these nudges spurred risk information seeking behaviors that could provide a pathway to risk mitigation behaviors. So what the practitioners have seen from this effort has been a major uptick in local activities. For example, the Cedar Edge Fire Protection District was an area that West Region had been trying for years to initiate defensible space projects with limited success. After one letter mailing, they had managed to set up and complete 17 defensible space projects. And they tracked 30 people showing up to a community meeting and 45 residents scheduling an in-person on-site visit. In fact, we had to slow the pace of how we unfolded the research part of the project so that our practitioner partners can slow the demand on their limited resources. On the research side, we saw an overall 13% response rate. So that's folks getting a letter in the mail, using the instructions to type in a URL into a web browser, using the personal access code to see their wildfire risk assessments. We didn't see in this initial pilot any overall effects from the treatments. However, we did see a strong heterogeneous effect conditional on parcel rating. So residents who were told that they were in the lowest risk categories were measurably less likely to go to the website. Residents who were told that they were in the highest risk categories were measurably more likely to go to the website. In other words, when residents were told their risk rating, the responses were measurably different depending on the relative risk. Those at highest risk were effectively nudged to seek out additional information that could help them take the subsequent steps to reduce risk. And this has possible benefits for community programs that might want to tailor their outreach efforts to try to get the attention of those residents who are living on the highest risk properties. And so we used this pilot to write up the proposal that I mentioned earlier that is now funded by National Science Foundation and that is currently underway. In this project, we're extending the pilot nudge work, and we're undertaking more nudges in the same Southwest Colorado study area. We're also extending into new areas. So we're pursuing innovation on types of nudge messages and with our overall experimental design. For example, we're exploring hope versus fear, testing a scared straight approach to two messages of resilience and hope, and also testing the use of descriptive norms. So we're using the survey responses to help us understand and describe normative behaviors in a community, and then using those to encourage the least active members of the community to keep up with the Joneses. And we're working in new location. So with additional funding from Forest Service and investment from some of our partners on the ground, it's helping us push forward in Ashland, Oregon, and in communities outside of Wenatchee, Washington, which will allow us to make comparisons across different community types from more urban areas to more rural areas. And so, as Chris said at the front end, we have ongoing relationships and projects in many areas, and we're developing new partnerships across the West. And in wrapping up, I also want to say that as this pandemic unfolded, we checked in with our ongoing and new practitioner partners about whether they wanted to proceed with the work or if they needed to hit pause for a little bit. And despite being stretched thin and despite funds being reallocated, consistently, we're seeing our partner organizations want to continue to move forward because they know that pandemics don't stop wildfire seasons and that moving forward with evidence will help them be more effective and efficient with their programs to make mitigation work. And we're so grateful to have had this opportunity to talk to you today, and we are happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Chris, for this presentation. And you have just so clearly demonstrated the power of moving to this sort of context-specific, culturally appropriate, evidence-informed mitigation action that is undergirded by researcher practitioner collaborations. And so thank you so much both for everything you shared. And we're going to go ahead, thanks to your clearly organized presentation. We have a good amount of time for questions. And so to all of the participants out there on the line, if you have questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A box or the chat box. And so I'm going to start with one question from, I'm not sure if you say Lisa or Lissa, who she said, how are you supporting the fire specialists to go to each home to do individualized assessments? It sounds expensive and time consuming, but productive.
Chris, you want to take, go ahead.
Yeah. I went ahead and typed in an answer there, but I should expound on it a little bit. So obviously, resources, time, and money are a challenge for a lot of organizations. You know, there's oftentimes nobody in an area that's tasked with solely addressing wildfire risk in their community, or it's a shared responsibility. Some like West Region are fortunate to have a dedicated staff for an area to help residents improve their fire adaptation. But again, you know, when we started looking at this, we were trying to figure out a way to reduce burden on practitioners. You know, as a practitioner myself when I started, we had, looked at it from a standpoint of, all right, well, how do we have, and how do we approach this kind of from a time management, financial management, fiscal management side of things? And if we have a baseline of all residents, as Hannah talked about, looking at this from the census stuff, we look at all residents in the community, we have a basic baseline understanding of risk for all these residents. So those residents that are just, they need to know, like, it needs to be pointed out to them that they have some element of risk and what that risk is comprised of. They might choose to take action on their own. They might say, oh, this is great, or oh my gosh, I have a risk. What can, I need to do something about it. And so some people do things on their own. So you address a percentage of that population just by telling them the specifics about their risk. And then, as Hannah pointed out, like making sure you get that in there, into their hands where they can use it, understand it, digest it. And then there's another group of people that say, oh my gosh, I have a risk I didn't know, or great, this is, information that matches with what my understanding was, or somewhat, but I need to know more. I need to know specifically what I can do to improve my situation. Those people would likely, benefit from the direct interaction with a practitioner and an on-site consultation where somebody comes out, actually spends time with them, whereas the rapid assessment is the windshield visit, just looking at the elements from the road. The on-site consultation gives, the homeowner an opportunity to interact with somebody and ask detailed questions, look at some more nuance of the individual wildfire risk of their property. So we talk about this as a 60-60 approach, 60 seconds, 60 minutes. So the practitioner organization invests that time with a group of people that need that additional information. And then it kind of gets into the cost share. So you give people baseline, you spend some time with a smaller group of people that need it, and then you look at, well, can we offer a cost share? Do we invest more time or more money into individuals that need that to push them to mitigate? So the rapid risk assessments really really do not take a lot of time. Some of the examples in West Region, I think all 600 plus of those in the Log Hill community, which is one of the places we started out, that took about a week. It varies based on, how dense or how spread out properties are. There is an investment of time, but again, this approach is designed to minimize to manage the limited resources of time and money.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, one of the things that we've done when we first started doing this work, the practitioners were using pencil and paper, and they were then entering the data into a spreadsheet. And since we have an app now that they can take a tablet out into the field that's got a geolocation, so that we preload the apps with the county assessor data, so it's all mapped out. And as Chris said, these are rapid risk assessments, and driving by, they can, it's 11 attributes, and they click it on their app, and then they can upload those data. And those have provided some great efficiency to getting it done. But yeah, this is absolutely a partnership, and the organizations we work with are bringing time and money to the table to make this possible.
Thanks, Chris and Hannah. We have a couple other questions that are coming in. So one from Erica, she wanted to know, are there resources and assessments available for businesses as well?
So the assessment piece could be conducted on a piece of a property that has a business. But at this point in time, we have not been working with organizations that are working with businesses. Do you know more about business opportunities, Chris?
Yeah, just to expand on that, as you said, it's dependent on the partner organizations that we worked with. We're focused on meeting the needs of the partners that we work with, something that's meaningful to them. And so, as Hannah said, we'd look at the wildfire risk of the business itself in terms of looking at the responses and the perceptions of those responsible for that property, that would take a little bit of thought. But again, if, we worked with a partner that said, hey, our business community is an integral part of our wildland urban interface, and, we want to address that, that's certainly something that our team would, work with them on. But yeah, there would probably be a little bit more thought in terms of, how do you represent those that are in that business, or do you come to that business or have responsibility for the futuring of that business.
Thanks for that. So Ellen from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, she's asked, have you shared your research results with community officials and agencies to help inform their risk communication messaging?
So part of our approach, we always engage in site visits when we're getting to know our new partners on the ground, and we try to spend as much time at the front end and the back end of projects. And what we always do is we end up doing community presentations where county commissioners, representatives from local agencies will show up to hear the results, and we present with our practitioner partners as a way to support their programs, as a way to help amplify their work, and also as a way to really talk through the results of some of the research. And so we also, though, we try to use our approach to enable our practitioner partners in their interaction with their community officials and agencies, more so than have direct ourselves. We do that, yeah, our primary mission is to really support the programs and the leadership from the programs we work with.
And to tag on to that, as Hannah said, they often do, right? They share those results with boards or commissioners or their leadership. That's it's a valuable component. Is once we've worked with partners and have the information, the results. I know that they have often sat down with those folks, made presentations, and shared that. And Hannah's example in the town of Mountain Village is an excellent one, where sharing those results with community officials, leadership, et cetera, have informed their decisions on how they might modify their policies and ordinances in the community. As an agency person myself, I will say that the social science side of things, the household survey and the responses from residents and communities has contributed and shaped some of the decisions that I've made, or my agency and organization has made in the past, about things like implementing prescribed fire near communities, and understanding people's willingness for vegetation management through fuels reduction projects, mechanical or prescribed fire, and the potential impacts of smoke to a community. So I've used it as an agency person to inform some of the work and actions that were proposed or had taken place.
Mm-hmm. Chris, that's a good transition to a question that Victoria wanted to ask of you both. She wanted to know more about sort of the nitty gritty of the survey instruments, the postcards, et cetera, the other resources that you use to engage participants and community members. So can you talk to us about how the WIRI team goes about creating those social science research instruments, as well as your more outward facing risk communication materials?
So
yeah, I'll talk a little bit about,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to talk a little bit about the survey, and then Hannah, you can talk about the risk assessment, and then you can talk about the survey and postcards, et cetera. So the survey, the rapid wildfire risk assessment side of things, that's been a somewhat of an evolution